It's real. It's real. You know the deal. You know the deal. Come on.
Hey, it's Shantae.
And I'm Natalie, and welcome to What's the Deal, a podcast powered by The Norfus Firm. At The Norfus Firm, we solve people problems, and we have the pleasure of working with employers all around the world on HR and DEI issues. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well today. How are you?
I'm good. You know, whenever we're here, it's fun.
Yeah.
And it helps to crystallize our life's work.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of just being able to be ourselves and chat it up on these really critical topics for the workplace.
Very much so. But in a way that, like, you're dealing with the real, right? Like, we're not denying that these things are happening. But I think you and I have gotten to a place where there's a level of indifference that's starting to creep in.
I thought we would call that acceptance.
Acceptance. It's a much better word.
You're usually the one to say acceptance. So maybe it is indifference, y'all. I do think, though, it is sort of like it is a blend of indifference or acceptance that, you know, the human condition is what it is. And
yeah.
So it's not that we can come in and do this work and solve for all of that, right? Because people show up at the workplace with many, many things that happen in their life before they met you as an employer. So, you know, certainly, in all seriousness, we're never really advocating for trying to get to the root of all sort of human conflict and such, because that's pretty well impossible. But so in knowing baseline that folks are going to show up in wild ways, you know.
I think it allows you to really kind of cut through the noise. That's at least where I am in this work is really, okay, yeah, that's always going to be there. That loud, whatever that is over there.
We're always going to be too busy. We're going to always be tired. We're always going to, other people are going to sort of change how they see their identity, and we're going to have to try something different. Technology is going to change. Right. Those are the constants.
People are going to push back. People are going to resist. People are going to be all in. They're not. Like, this push and pull is the human condition.
Correct.
And it's always going to happen. So it's like, all right, ride the wave.
Ride the wave. So we realized when we were, you know, I think we talk about this a lot on the show, that we put a lot of effort into our topics. And we really, you know, look at what are we seeing in the data that we collect, what are we seeing in what we read out there in the world, what's relevant. And we realized that we've skipped over on the podcast, not out in the world.
In the world, yeah.
Talking about this sort of anti-DEI legislation that's passed in some states. So we were like, we've talked about it. I've been quoted in articles about it. I talked to clients about it. But we want to bring it to our platform and talk about it.
Yeah. Really dig in.
So the first thing we'll talk about is the recent legislation that passed in Texas earlier this year, which I learned up on because I was quoted in an article about it in Texas. And so where it started, the conversation started in Texas, was in early 2023, where Governor Abbott sent out a warning about the state agencies that had DEI policies. From the position that Governor Abbott was taking is that some of these policies unfairly benefit some groups to the detriment of others by considering factors other than merit in hiring decisions. And that meant at that time, a lot of the state agencies decided to pause their DEI initiatives because they're being told that it's problematic. And before we even go further, that alone makes my blood boil and my eyes roll. What is your feeling about it? I mean, it's so annoying. It's so annoyingly wrong, but I'm sorry. I did ask you. I just got caught up in my own external processing in the second here, but...
Yeah, it's so short-sighted and limited in the view, because I think it comes from this place of it's called zero sum. I think that's what it's called, where it's like, if I win, someone else loses. If I lose, someone else wins, kind of thing. Where it's like, that is not the game we're playing here, guys. But okay, and I think it's that I need to. Again, when you're centered and things you've been used to being able to move in the world a certain way, and opportunities just present themselves, when things start to shift and that dynamic changes, you feel like you're losing something or something's being taken away from you. in the royal you, right? Not just individual people. And I think that folks struggle with that because the default has been majority in this country are white people and they should have the majority of the access. So then when that starts to shift, it feels like we're losing for some groups of people, right? Like it feels that way. That might not be the case at all, but it feels that way. And then unfortunately, we have to be real. There are instances where people didn't really apply these concepts well, and you did end up with folks in positions who may have come from certain underrepresented groups who were not ready to be in those roles. So we got to acknowledge that too. Like we can't just say that they're absolutely wrong. No, there have been cases, but I think it's disproportionate in terms of those incidents, few incidents where that happens get blown up. And that becomes the talking point that the talking heads then propagate to all their people that they talk to.
Well, yeah, because what you are dealing with is a lack of intentionality, right? So when
I just make a point real quick,
Yeah,
but there
of
are
course.
also a bunch of majority dominant people in these positions who are not qualified. So let's be
Okay,
clear
that's
about
a different
that too.
conversation.
But go ahead.
Because we talk about that a lot,
ahead.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're allowed to be
Go ahead.
mediocre, then why are you struggling with folks that don't show up the way you want? But that's also, girl,
It's
but
so
girl,
much.
girl, because that also
many
gets
things.
at our favorite topic of lack of self-awareness. If I do think a lot of times, like the people in the majority who are in these positions of power have convinced themselves that they earned their way to those roles. And there's countless examples of people just being set up for success from the moment they're born, because they're born into money. They're born into people who run huge elite universities. They're born into these things that give them an instant leg up that they didn't earn, so to speak. They were born into it. So, right. I mean, there's those both sides, but my sort of brain is going to, again, I guess you can't really take the employment lawyer out of me, where you're just like, that DEI is not about considering things other than merit. We're super pro merit. We're
Extremely
super pro.
Mm-hmm.
You should be able to do this job. You should earn your way to the positions.
Absolutely.
The reason you consider a broader lens is that because people there's certain groups who are marginalized and haven't had the access, the way their merit shows up may be different than what you're accustomed to. Mm-hmm. And so the point is that you should be taking a step outside of only looking at success in the way you've gotten there. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people, when you're looking for people who've been successful like you end up with people who look like you and are like you in a lot of different ways. We're saying, make it fair for everyone. Mm-hmm. We are not saying hire unqualified Black people so you can say you have black people. Right, or exactly. Hire unqualified women so you could have more women. That is stupid, guys. Right? Like that is not what we're saying. Right. And the reason why I get so passionate about it is like it becomes this, like you're intentionally not trying to understand it. Like that's how it feels to me sometimes, where it's like, it is not this complicated. Right. It is really not that hard. No one is advocating for reverse discrimination, which is also a very odd concept. We're saying talent does not discriminate. Mm-hmm. Every single race, ethnicity, gender expression, sexual orientation, everyone in all of those categories has the potential to be successful and talented. Right. But if you're not thoughtful about your processes, we're going to keep where we are. And every single time we get a new client, they're like, oh, we're in a white male dominated industry, so it's like really hard to get people. And it's like, that's every industry
almost. Yeah.
Like, so you don't want to, like, basically it's like I always say, then say what you really mean. Like, you don't care if it gets diversified, like, then be real about that. And it's like, I think we're past this whole political correctness in this country. So it's like, you don't have to come up, because we don't believe you if you say it's not that. Like, it's not even believable because it's so draconian to come in and say, I don't really get DEI, and it seems to me like you're just trying to get a lot of the Blacks and the browns and the gays in here. So like, we're not doing all of that. Mm-hmm. That's how it comes across. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's lazy to me, because what you're saying is, I don't want to do the work that is required to really get the best people in here. That's your job. That is your job. Everyone's job It's the finest talent. It's not just the recruiters or the talent acquisition folks. It's everyone's job to try to get the best talent in here. And so no one wants to do this part of their job. It's wild how people still have jobs then, because this is a part of it.
All right, so one step further. In mid-June, Texas introduced legislation that ban higher education institutions from instituting and implementing DEI policies. Educational institutions cannot have policies on DEI, and this law went into effect on January 1st. I haven't looked, but I would imagine there's probably a lot of lawsuits that have been filed, and just also another sort of FYI. A lot of times this legislation, it passes, it goes into effect, but it gets enjoined because there's some aspect of it that's, not unconstitutional. That never gets talked about as much, which is also frustrating for me as a lawyer, like tell both sides, but there's that. Talk to me.
The higher ed part is really dangerous. Yeah. It's really dangerous. Because if we talk about it from a pipelining perspective, if you're looking at employers like who want to get grads or people that are coming out of these certain schools, if that part of the pipeline isn't actively looking for other types of people, how can the employer then get other types of people who have whatever they need? So it's like we are really shrinking the pool of qualified applicants across the board if you're taking this as something that these schools should be looking at, right? Like, so everyone has to be involved in this. It's the employer, it's educational systems, it's everything all the way down in order for us to really get access to the broad talent that we know exists out there. But if different parts of this chain start to drop off, it weakens it.
Well, we also, before I say the next thing, we also know that people want it. So it's like if you're saying, hey guys, don't come to Texas, to our university system, if you want to know about DEI. If you're about that DEI life, we don't want you. And it's bizarre to me that you'd put up this type of legislation. It's so bizarre because DEI didn't just come out a year ago, right? So all of a sudden, you're doing something that no one really asked for, and now you're sending a message that you don't want certain people or certain people with certain thought processes, and there's so much richness to being in a higher ed institution with people with all different kinds of backgrounds. To me, to limit the education process, to limit the thought processes, that limits innovation. It does all of these things that are just these, to me, very obvious negative consequences from taking a position on something that I don't even understand. Still to this day, I've researched this a lot because I get where did this come from? Who cares? Who said that we need this, right? Mm-hmm. And we can theorize about it, but there really isn't this huge groundswell of U.S. Citizens that are we don't want DEI, get rid of it, right? That's not even a thing. So it's a made up thing that it's an issue to solve.
Yeah, because I think there's certain groups that are feeling disenfranchised. And so they need something to rally around, and these things become political so that folks have something to get them up in arms that distracts them from everything else that's happening in the world. So, that's the conspiracy theory, brain part of my brain. But I really do think it's a distraction. I really do think it's a way to keep folks fighting with each other so that they don't have to deal with the real issues that are happening in this world. And so if you look back at the history of America, I'm always going to go back to that because, again, this stuff is working as it's designed. That is my hill, and I will die on it. It's working as it's designed. There's always been something that has to keep us disconnected and fighting in this way. And so this is just the new thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So Texas wasn't first.
Texas, good old state of Florida. We live here, but, it's beautiful. The weather's beautiful. Other things aren't so great. But yeah, so we're dealing with Florida and Texas. Boy, they are really trying it, and they're really together in it. But you were quoted recently. And I don't see here which one it is, but we'll put it in some note, which article this came from. But basically the quote is, the anti-DEI legislation in Tallahassee is very anti-business, which is really hard to follow, Norfus said. she being the Norfus, all these companies want to leave California and come to Florida, but now state officials don't want them to come because a lot of them have DEI programs. Tell to us about that quote.
Almost every company in the U.S. has some form of a commitment plan, program, or strategy that relates to DEI. We knew, so that's just sort of a fact, right? Like, I mean, you could peruse websites. Almost every company has at least a statement that they're committed to it, right? And we know from our own work that the commitments have varying degrees, right? So if you're thinking about it from the standpoint of, we here in Miami, there's been a lot of work by the tech community to make Miami welcoming to tech companies. And there was a lot of conversation during the pandemic of some tech companies thinking that they would pick up roots from California and come to Wynwood and other parts of Miami to bring tech to Miami. So if you're thinking like, okay, maybe there's a benefit to me to being in another state, and then like you get this huge like red flag of, but we're going to pick fights with you about DEI. Politicians are going to pick fights with you about DEI. To me, that sounds similar to the education piece. You don't want businesses that are going to be out in the open. I mean, the governor of this state picked a fight with Disney, which is probably one of the largest employers in this state, just alone. Like, how is that good for your constituency? I was talking to someone in Central Florida where like people are scared about this because they need their jobs and they don't even agree with it. Right. So it's like this piece where it's like, where's the business savvy here, right? Like, you want people to invest in the state. Disney gave up $1 billion hotel project after this fight with DeSantis. $1 billion meant a bunch of jobs, more beautiful places to house, you know, the tourists we're very thankful for who come to Florida. And now it's shut down. Right. Just like that. They were going to start it, now it's done. So there's this real tangible thing of like, are you anti-money? Because you got folks who are like, well, when are we going to come? We've seen this, the NAACP has issued, you know, these sort of bulletins of like, don't do your conferences, don't do your anythings in Florida. And it's like, there's a lot of that going on. We have a client who has a program in Miami, and they had, you know, parents call and say, we don't know if it's safe for our kids to come, and because of this anti-DEI legislation. And it's just weird noise because there's no logical route to it being helpful to business. Right. And even when I've talked to, you know, we had a client who's a lobbying firm, and I talked to one of the, you know, Republican partners about like, help me understand. It's not to fight. It's not to me, it's not even about politics. I just want to understand the position. And even he couldn't point to like, I'm like, is there a website? Is there data? Is there, because, you know, I looked for all those things, and it was like, well, there might be, but I'm not aware of any. And it's like, right. And there's a countless plethora of data that talks about how DEI is good for business. So it's just, to me, it's like you just you're not in tune with business if this is where you think makes sense, and picking fights with huge employers, again, over something that no one asked for. That's where it came from for me.
And it's not even a real, like the way that they're defining DEI, it always goes back to shared language, is not even what DEI is. Yeah. So it's like you're making this whole thing.
It's a proxy. They're using it as a proxy for discrimination. Right. Right. Like, they're saying, if we focus on DEI, then you guys are going to discriminate against middle-aged white guys. Right. Like, that's what it boils down to, where it's like the words are about discrimination, really. They're not about diversity, having a bunch of different people with different thought processes, backgrounds, experiences. They're not talking about equity, which is, we recognize that some people have had a leg up, so we have to think about how to remove barriers, not give people things they didn't earn, but remove the barriers so they can earn it. Right. And the inclusion piece, which is huge. I talk about this all the time. Like, you want people to stay because it's really expensive. The figures range from either $17,000 per hire to up to 6 to 9 months of the person's salary to replace someone. It is very expensive to lose people. Yeah. So that's the inclusion piece. Like, you want to create a space so that they're like, oh no, I dig this place enough to stay here and keep doing a good job. So that's DEI, that's the business.
Right.
It's like, how do we get the best people in here and how do we make them feel like this place is fair so that they stay? That's really all we're talking about with DEI. We're not talking about discriminating. We're not talking about creating quotas. We're not talking about you have to have X number of women or we're going to boycott you. That is not what any of this is. We're not even saying that forget about the middle-aged white man, because we talk to middle-aged white men all the time. We're like, you have diversity too. You came from a poor upbringing. Remember that conversation that we had with the gentleman who was from Arkansas, the white dude who is a partner at a firm and really, really smart, and he had that heavy Southern accent. You want to talk about that conversation?
Yeah, it was really cool because we were brought in, the diversity team brought us in, and so the committee brought us in, and so he's on the committee.
No, he wasn't. You were saying
he wasn't on the committee.
You were saying he should be. But he's like, I don't have any
Yeah. He wasn't on the committee, but he's interested in this work. Like, he really shows up for it. And so we were speaking with some of the team members after our workshop, and he was chatting with us, and we asked him because he had really great perspective on a lot of these topics, just based on his lived experience. Again, he grew up in the South, but he grew up in an area where he engaged with a lot of different people, and it formed his thinking about things. And so we were like, well, man, that would be an asset to the diversity team that you all are creating here. And he was like, nah, I don't bring anything. I wouldn't bring anything to the. I'm just a middle-aged white guy. I don't bring anything to the team.
And you're like,
what are you talking? What? This was an incredible conversation that we just had with you. I think more people should be having these conversations and hearing the perspective that you bring to the table. But
and the other piece of that, what we were talking about, and again, this goes to the diversity piece, is the Southern accent piece in the U.S., regardless of your race, often sends the signal to people that you're dumb.
Right.
For some reason, and he talked about that. Like, he was saying how if you look at a movie, there's only two types of people who are from the South, and usually the character is someone's. What is it? They're either dumb or they're the villain.
Something like that.
Yeah. But the smart thing comes in, and that piece of having to overcome, like, yes, you hear the Southern drawl, but like, I'm brilliant and I'm going to bring that to the table. And I think that those are the types of issues that allow us all to connect. That it's diversity isn't a group. Like, diversity, when you look at the definition, is being composed of differing elements. Every single one of us, I talk about this all the time, every single one of us is composed of differing elements. The street you grew up on, did you have a single mother? Did your father pass away when you were 3? Do you have an accent that's different than the majority? What foods you eat, the places you've lived. Do you think about folks who are veterans and have been in like military branches that where they moved around a lot? That's diversity, right? Because you're living in all these different cultures. So it's the piece of, like, diversity is not code for Black. Really diversity is not code for LGBTQ. That's not what we're saying. That's when you apply it to the workplace, yes, you might have conversations around, you have some underrepresented diversity,
right?
Some categories that are underrepresented, but that also doesn't mean then just go only find that either, right? It's like this, to your point, it's not this or that. It's not like I win, you lose. It's not that. It's like, come on, guys.
If you identify a gap, and again, bring it back to your business then. If you identify a gap that is hindering you from really being able to maximize whatever it is in a certain area, it could be profits, it could be reach, whatever it is, find the people who can help you in that, like, really get into that gap and really, like, solution for that gap. Like, that's all it is. Find the perspectives that will help you do what you need to do to manage your business and make the money that you need to make is all we're asking people to do.
I do have one intrusive thought, and I just have to share it, that we're having this very serious topic, and I realize that now we can see my very unserious feet with my socks and my slides. And I just want folks to know that it's like in the 50s in Miami. So for us, that's cold, but I can't give up on my slides. So I had to put the socks on with the slides. But okay, so back to...
I wonder if they can even see it. Do we even know?
Yeah, they can.
Oh, they can.
On the video. I noticed that when I have on slides and I forget that I have on slides, I see them. But that's okay, because here we are.
You also live in Florida, and that's a thing in Florida. Yeah. Socks and slides.
Being real on what's the deal, drop a little bar there.
She's a rapper. Guys.
She's not. So if we're bringing it back, the reality is, if we think about just the ending note here, right? We have a lot of data that tells us that focusing on DEI which is what we're talking about. We're not talking about discrimination or affirmative action. We're talking about DEI. Focusing on DEI is good for business. Brings better ideas, brings better innovation. We've quoted many stats before that people want diversity in their workplace. We know that from the people we work with. So DEI, there's proof, there's evidence that it's strong for business. So the thing that I would just leave our audience with is, what would be our call to action to you is use your voice to help dispel and correct some of these huge platformed mis and
disinformation.
Yes.
It's because a lot of it's on purpose too.
Yes. Yeah. Right. And so when people are like, well, what can we do? Please use your voice. Please go on your LinkedIn when you're sharing stuff. Please talk to your employees and re-emphasize why you don't agree with that. Please do that, right? Because so we have the ability. I'm pretty confident, again, if we were taking our data sets as sample sizes, that the majority of people are not aligned with this kind of view. Help dispel it. Help them feel safe.
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to, isn't it?
Yes.
People don't feel safe.
Yep.
They feel threatened.
Yep. All right. Well, we'll be back. We've got lots more to share. And subscribe, tell a friend, go on all of our outlets, norfusfirm.com, at What's the Deal on Instagram, all of it.
We'll see you soon.
See you later.
Here it is. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership. That's the deal when you know what you're dealing with.